So hello and welcome to J Designs. Today what we're going to be talking about is the 4th gen Toyota Tacoma. I'm going to go ahead and state it now. I'm going to call it the 4G Tacoma because I don't feel like saying 4th gen a million times in this video. Let's get right into it. Let's talk about what this truck looks like. First off, I don't really care what it looks like. The stuff I really care about is everything underneath the skin of this truck, and that's really what I want to talk about in this video. I enjoy like the engineering aspects and the advancements in the drivetrain and stuff like that versus how the truck looks. Like, you can build the best looking truck in the world, but if it's crap underneath, like it's got an old 3.5 liter engine with a old school 6-speed transmission, it's not a good truck to me. Yeah, shots fired right there for some people. And we'll get to that a little later in the video. But if you want to hear me talk about the way the truck looks, go find another video. What we're going to talk about this is everything underneath the skin. So let's get right into that. Pretty sure the 4G Tacoma is going to have a turbocharged engine. That's going to be great for a number of reasons. Turbocharged engines are just really good at making that really low bottom end torque. And then because we have advancements in technology like variable valve timing or variable geometry turbochargers, I don't know if Toyota is going to use a VG turbo, but because of those advancements, you can kind of shift that power band and make it really wide power band with these turbo motors. But really, that low down torque is great for towing. It's great for off-road. It's great for city driving, and it's great for highway driving, actually. So generally, you're 1,000 to 2,000 RPM cruising on the highway. You're right in that low RPM zone of that engine. Low RPM means you're going to be getting really good fuel economy down there. So the bottom end torque is probably going to be the biggest improvement to the 4th gen Tacoma, at least from an engine aspect. And the reason why I really want to point that out is because 3rd gen Tacomas have a 3.5 liter that is really a car engine that was never designed for a truck, but Toyota put it in the 3rd gen Toyota Tacoma to comply with fuel economy regulations. And a car engine in a truck is just a bad ideal. So a lot of people end up having to tune the transmissions in a 3rd gen Tacoma, and people blame the 6-speed transmission like, oh, it's a bad transmission, it has poor calibration. That's actually not the case. The root of the issue and why you have to tune the transmission and the engine on that truck is because that 3.5 liter doesn't make very good bottom end torque, and that's because it's a car engine. If you go back and look at all the engines in Toyota trucks historically, which was the 3 liter in the Toyota pickups, and they went to a 3.4 liter. Both of those are truck engines. And then they went to the 4 liter in the 2nd gen Tacoma, again, dedicated truck engine, never put into a car. And then with the 3rd gen Tacoma, the black sheep of all of the Tacomas, 3.5 liter car engine. No bueno. So it's going to be awesome to see that super low bottom end torque that a turbocharged engine provides. The other big thing, so you can see it in a couple of images. I have images off screen here. If I keep looking this direction, that's why. But I'll put them up on the screen for you. In this image, you can see there's like something hanging down underneath the truck, but it doesn't look like exhaust. The reason why I note that for everyone out there who's a 2nd or a 3rd gen Tacoma owner that has a V6 engine, because it's a V6, it has 2 exhaust runners that come down, and then at some point one of them has to cross over underneath the entire drivetrain, and consequently you have an exhaust that hangs down super low under the truck. This is going to be an inline 4-cylinder with a turbo, so only one big cylinder. So the cylinders are here. You have an intake side and you have an exhaust side of the engine. That's generally how they're set up, and it's just going to be one clean exhaust down the outside of the truck. And if you look at this image here, you can see there's no exhaust crossover underneath the truck, which is great because that was always the lowest hanging part on the truck. And when you were off-roading, you'd pretty much constantly bash that little flimsy piece of exhaust. Mine's definitely got a bunch of dings in it. You could see something hanging down on this truck right below where the driver passenger area would be. That's most likely a cross member that's supporting the transmission and not the exhaust crossover. It's very square looking. If it was an exhaust, it'd be more rounded off. Keeping it with the engine, there's been a lot of arguments about like reliability in forums and on Facebook posts and stuff like that. Guys, the Toyota Tacoma is one of the best-selling mid-size trucks. Toyota is not going to risk that market when they make this new motor. by having a not reliable engine. Like if the engine is not reliable, people are just going to go buy one of the other mid-sized trucks that are out there. Furthermore to that, Toyota is like what, 10 years late to the turbocharged inline four-cylinder game. So Ford had a 10-speed automatic with a turbocharged engine 10 years ago. I doubt Toyota's just been sitting around with their thumbs up their you know what. They've been doing R&D testing. They know it's going to last essentially. Still keeping with the engine, modability. So generally with a naturally aspirated engine, all you can really do is an intake and an exhaust. And even when you do those things, you're getting, 10 to 0 horsepower gain. With a turbocharged engine, you can do quite a lot. You can tune them, you can get more power out of it. Toyota is generally very, very conservative with their tunes on their engine, so you're most likely be able to just bump that up by flashing the computer and getting quite a bit more power out of it. But should you really need to modify the engine on this truck? Most likely not. I think the turbocharged engine is going to have a tremendous amount of power, and especially being in such a small, light truck, it's going to be quite quick. You shouldn't need to mod it. Obviously, swapping turbos is a possibility with a boosted engine or an engine that's already built for boost. But I think it will be kind of hard to swap turbos out on this 2.5 liter, or excuse me, the 2.4 or 2.7, whatever it is. And the reason for that is if you have your engine here, the way turbochargers were mounted back in the day, as turbochargers mounted kind of far away from the motor, and there was like a big exhaust track that ran over to the turbo. Manufacturers have been trending away from that for a couple of reasons. One of them is response, just there being a long exhaust runner between the engine and the turbocharger. There's a lot of compressible gas in between that, and that leads to bad throttle response. So manufacturers have been moving the turbocharger closer and closer to the engine. The other reason for moving the turbocharger close to the engine is just for like keeping heat essentially in the exhaust. By keeping heat in the exhaust with the turbocharger sitting very close to the engine, you're not losing heat through all of the surface area of that exhaust. That heat is staying in the exhaust and going to the turbine and driving the turbine. So that really increases like the amount of boost that the turbo can provide. Most people probably think it's the pressure that drives the turbocharger, but heat and energy are the same thing when you're at like fundamental physics and stuff like that. So anyways, heat staying in the exhaust, really good thing. With the turbocharger being located so close to the engine, it's generally hard to kind of switch the turbo out for something bigger to make more power. So modability is most likely going to be kind of hard. If you look at engines like the BMW engine that comes in the Toyota Supra, a little bit of a tangent here, we'll get back to Tacoma in a second. But if you look at that engine, the turbo is actually integrated, I think, into the head, or it's actually integrated into like the exhaust manifold on the side of the engine. So you really can't like swap that turbo out. You pretty much have to build a whole new exhaust manifold if you want to swap the turbo. It's kind of crazy. Okay, back to the 4G Tacoma. The other big benefit, in my opinion, the biggest potential like performance gain or improvement to the truck is going to come from the transmission. That engine's most likely going to be great, but seeing a 10-speed automatic transmission, which is what the Tundra has, it makes sense that they're going to drop it into the Tacoma. That 10-speed transmission is just going to improve the truck in so many ways. So with 10 speeds in the transmission, obviously you get that really low gear and you get those really high gears. But in between, you have a very fine selection of gear ratios between that, and that's good because that allows the engine to hit whatever target RPM it needs to get you the best fuel economy or the best torque, the best performance essentially. And having a super fine selection of gears allows it to hit that ideal balance between like economy and performance. All right, so moving on from the transmission, let's talk about the rear end of this truck. So most likely, looking at all of the images, it's going to still have a solid axle, which is unfortunate. I really think this truck should be switched over to independent rear suspension. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but talking about leaf springs or multi-link, in the images that Toyota has teased, I think it's a higher end model, but it definitely looks like it has a multi-link rear suspension. So Normally you have a solid axle like this, and you would traditionally have like a leaf spring that just goes like this to the axle, but they have multi-links. Just by the images, you can see them hanging out underneath the truck. Multi-link's good because it just does a really good job of controlling like the positioning of that axle and the movement of it. With multi-link comes coil springs. Coil springs generally lead to a better ride. I would imagine certain variants of the Toyota Tacoma actually still come with leaf springs. So leaf springs are cheap to produce compared to multi-links. And the reason for that is with leaf springs, you just essentially need two brackets on the frame and then one bracket on the axle. It's just 3 brackets. When you go to a multi-link setup on one side of the vehicle, you have 2 links coming down. So that's 2 brackets on the frame and then 2 brackets on the axle. And then there's an additional one for your side-to-side control of the axle. So you end up with 5 brackets built onto the truck. That just adds additional cost. So multi-link is not cheap to do, but it's going to lead to better axle control. So don't know which one we're going to see. Is it going to be leafs? Is it going to be multi-link? Obviously there's going to be multi-link, but leafs are up in the question. Leafs are generally cheaper to produce, and they are very good at dealing with like a variety of loads, or at least a little bit better at dealing with it than coil springs are. So I think the 4th Gen Tacoma should come with independent rear suspension. Obviously, we're not getting it. You can see the solid axle hanging down underneath the truck. But there are a ton of benefits to independent rear suspension. And to be honest with you, this topic deserves its own video. But you can totally get the travel numbers out of independent suspension, pretty comparable travel numbers to solid axles. And the reason for that is you take the diff pumpkin and you center mount it within the chassis. So with pretty much any vehicle that has independent front suspension, the differential's off center, and consequently you get 2 really, really short axles on the end. And those short axles really just aren't conducive for good suspension travel numbers. If you take that diff pumpkin and you locate it, center it in the vehicle, you get really, really long axle shafts, and that's going to give you really good suspension travel. I know there's going to be some people out there that say, no, independent suspension doesn't travel very well compared to solid axles. If you look at something like Subarus or, a Jeep Cherokee, pretty much any all-wheel drive independent suspension SUV, the wheels don't really move all that much. And to that I would say those are not independent suspensions designed for off-roading. If you go look at the independent suspensions in Ultra 4 cars or the independent suspensions on side-by-sides or ATVs, those have a tremendous amount of travel in them. So if Toyota went in, ditched that solid axle and maybe the 5th Gen Tacoma and brought in independent rear suspension, there would be a lot of benefits to that. One of the other big benefits to independent rear suspension is if you look at the F-150 series of vehicles, pretty much all of them have a rear solid axle. And then when they went to the F-150 Lightning, which is based on the exact same chassis, they went to an independent rear suspension. And the reason for that is aerodynamics. So if you look at this image here of a Toyota Tacoma, or of the teaser images of the Toyota Tacoma, you can see that big diff pumpkin just hanging down in the airflow. So that big dumb solid axle hanging down in the airflow is terrible for aerodynamics. With independent suspension, everything's tucked up tight into the chassis. And I really see Toyota going down that route because they're already having issues meeting fuel economy regulations. That's part of the reason why they're going to the smaller displacement turbocharged engine and a multi-speed, or a 10-speed transmission. Both of those things are going to aid fuel economy. So aerodynamics is another big benefit to rear independent suspension. The other one is going to be unsprung weight. So that big heavy solid axle has to fight against essentially all the weight of the truck. And sometimes that big heavy solid axle wins. With independent rear suspension, it's very, very light. It's generally a far better ride quality. Really the only place solid axles excel over independent suspension is, well, I guess one, they're cheaper to manufacture generally speaking, at least when they're leaf sprung, maybe not multi-link. But the only place a solid axle really excels is in like off-road, slow speed, like rock crawling articulation. And that's it. In every other category, independent suspension excels. So make sure and stay tuned if you want to see a really in-depth talk about independent suspension on pretty much any vehicle. Anything that has independent front suspension should also have independent rear suspension, in my opinion. and it'd still be great off-road vehicles. Staying with the rear axle on this truck, we're definitely not getting independent rear suspension, but what we are getting is rear disc brakes. So that's pretty big thing for Toyota Tacoma. They have been drum brakes for a very, very long time. Drum brakes are something that's very cheap and easy to produce, but they're not very effective, and they're not very good at getting rid of heat. I know with my second gen Tacoma, if I have an event where a tire is spinning and the traction control, you can hear it engaging. When the traction control is engaging, you can hear it trying to work, but it's not very effective at actually slowing down the tire and getting it to regain traction. So rear disc brakes will be much better at doing that, and they're also better at dissipating heat, which is good for if you're going to like bigger tires, and when you're doing an overland setup and you've got a lot of weight in the bed, or when you're towing, again, a lot of weight on the rear of the truck. Those rear brakes are going to be doing a lot of work, so it's good that they can do that. They're really good at getting rid of heat. So that is a welcome thing to see on the rear of the Toyota Tacoma. Also, Toyota, back in the day when the third gen Tacoma came out, everyone was making a big deal about the rear drum brakes, and Toyota's like, no, we want to keep rear drum brakes because it keeps dust and crap like that from getting in the brake system, so you still have brakes. We already talked about them not being very, very effective. Furthermore, if you go through a muddy puddle in my truck, for example, with rear drum brakes, dirt and all kinds of crap gets in there, and for the next 10 minutes when you're using your brakes, you can hear grinding noises until essentially your brakes grind away whatever crap has gotten into that drum out of there. The front rotors don't do that. 1 or 2 hits on the brakes and they're totally clean and they're silent. So anyways, pretty cool to see rear disc brakes on the back of a Tacoma. That's how it should have been from day one. Let's move to the next thing. So it's going to be awesome. I think Toyota, just from pressure on the market, is going to allow either for fitment of bigger tires in a much more easier way than the current second and third gen Tacomas. Because I have a second gen Tacoma, I fit 35s in that truck, and you had to cut and move so much crap out of the way to get a 35-inch tire on this truck. I think they will allow for much larger tires, because if you look at the newest Toyota Tundra that came out, people are pretty easily getting 37-inch tires on these Toyota Tundras with very minimal rubbing. So I think on the Tacoma, they will have listened to the aftermarket and kind of moved things out of the way to allow for bigger tires. It'd be awesome to see it from the factory, to see a 35-inch tire. It's probably going to be a 33. But Toyota is seeing pressure from the aftermarket for that, because you look at, Jeeps pretty much come on 33s already. And then there's Jeeps and a lot of things from Ford and the Ram TRX, you can get those from the factory with 35-inch tires. And then if you look at Ford with their Raptor products, those come with 37-inch tires factory. So hopefully all that pressure from other manufacturers will force Toyota to fit bigger tires. And I guess we'll see when the truck's unveiled, but I think it will happen. So looking at the the front suspension rather. So there's this one image here. Obviously you can see the QS3 Fox shocks. That's really nothing all that important. There's plenty of manufacturers out there that have Fox shocks. That's really not all that interesting to me. What is really interesting about the front suspension is all of the aluminum components in it. So it looks like the tie rod, both the inner and the outer tie rod are aluminum. Obviously that bolt is still steel, because you can see rust on it in the teaser images. That's actually funny. Anyways, and also the knuckle, so that's what connects the lower control arm and the upper control arm together. Those are all aluminum, and that's great because when you have an independent front suspension like this, so this is your frame side and this is your wheel side, or where the knuckle and those aluminum components are. Those aluminum components are moving up and down a really big distance. So if you're going to cut weight somewhere, it's ideal to cut it out here where they're moving up and down a lot, and that's going to contribute a lot to better NVH. So that's less noise, vibration, and harshness. And that's also just going to allow that suspension to perform its job a lot better, because it's not controlling so much weight cycling up and down. So that kind of goes back into what I talked about versus independent rear suspension and solid axles. It's the same thing. Toyota's already cutting weight on their front suspension, trying to make it lighter to improve the performance of that suspension. Why not just get rid of that whole solid axle? Again, making it super, super light, at least as far as the weight that's going up and down. And obviously weight reduction improves the vehicle in pretty much every aspect. So you get better acceleration, better braking, better cornering ability, more reliable. All of that comes when you reduce weight. And no doubt that aluminum knuckle and those aluminum tie rod components are lighter. Another thing we want to talk about here, unfortunately, we're not getting some kind of a fancy aluminum upper control arm. It looks, you can see it at the top of this image here. It's just the old school flimsy stamped steel upper control arm. I'll do another video on this too. I think that flimsy upper control arm is a very important component of the Toyota independent front suspension. A lot of people like to upgrade their control arms to something more beefy. And then you have issues with like the alignment cam tabs getting knocked out or people bending steering knuckles. Anyways, I think that upper control arm is designed to flex from Toyota. That's something that's kind of brought over from the RC car world. You can yeet an RC car off of like 2 stories and it will land and be totally fine. And the reason why that happens is because RCs are designed to twist when they crash. I think the same thing is happening here with the upper control arm on Toyota independent suspensions. It's designed to move around, and taking that away by adding some sort of a super stiff upper control arm is probably not the best option. We'll do another video on that at some point as well. So moving on, Toyota is partnering with ARB, and I think that's, it's kind of cool, I guess. Toyota's been partnering with ARB in Australia for a very, very long time, but it's good to see they're finally bringing that to the States. So if somebody's buying a $50,000 or $60,000 Toyota Tacoma, and they want to modify it off of the showroom floor, you might be voiding some warranties. So it's really nice that you can get an upfitted rear bumper from the factory and keeping all your warranty, keeping all your parking sensors, all that good stuff. Another thing I do really want to point out here, I don't really care about the ARB bumper. Like, you're probably going to be able to get better aftermarket bumpers than the ARB one out there, higher clearance, lighter weight, stuff like that. The big thing I want to point out, man, is that recovery point. I just want that factory ARB recovery point. Nice radius edges means that you can use soft shackles around it, so we don't have to carry around big, heavy D-ring metal shackles. It's a good looking part too. Bright red, says ARB stamped right on it. And then obviously, since it's metal, if you want to use your big, heavy D-ring shackles, you can do that. Anyways, I just want that recovery point. I don't really care so much about the bumper, to be honest with you. But it is nice to see that they are partnering with ARB. Perhaps Toyota is seeing pressure from, there's a company here in America called AEV, and they've partnered with, I think, Jeep and Chevy products, and they've been kind of upfitting American vehicles. So Toyota's probably trying to keep up with that. So moving on, aluminum body panels. So this is something Toyota has done on the Tundra and I think the Land Cruiser platform in Australia. Same thing, again, Ford did years ago. Toyota's still kind of catching up. But it'd be really nice to see aluminum body panels, because that just really reduces the weight of the truck. Again, that increases reliability, fuel economy, acceleration, braking, handling. Every aspect of a vehicle is improved by reducing the weight of the vehicle. There are no losses to reducing the weight of the vehicle. There are just benefits. So it'd be super, super awesome to see lighter weight components that are obviously still durable. The other thing too is it's just really nice to not have a heavy door. Like, I have a 2nd gen Tacoma. It's all steel, obviously, and it's a big old heavy door. It's kind of hard to move. You jump in something like a nice sports car, like a Miata. My friend has a Miata, and the door is so light. It's just nicer to use, quite frankly. So it'd be super nice to see reductions in weight. Kind of keeping in theme with reductions of weight. So Toyota is teasing this little speaker thing. We'll get to that in a second. But in this image, they're teasing the speaker on the bed. So that's something I really wanted to talk about. Keeping in the theme of lightweight, Toyota Tacomas have had a composite bed, which is awesome. I know a lot of people don't like that composite bed, but as somebody who, I have a 2nd gen Tacoma and I've built a custom flatbed on it, it's very hard to hit a lot of the same, strength, durability, and weight requirements that Toyota put into that composite bed. That Toyota composite bed hits those 3 things incredibly well. Having built my own bumper, I think built my own bed. I think I got pretty close with the weight aspect and the strength aspect, but the durability of that composite bed is unmatched in my opinion. It's a pretty thick composite material, and you can throw stuff at it all day. You can try to scratch it. It's a pretty hard material. There's obviously no paint because it's a single material all the way through. It's not like a steel or aluminum bed where if you scratch through that layer of paint or galvanization, you're not going to get rust underneath it, right? These composite beds are awesome, and it's kind of hard to tell from the image, but it definitely looks like Toyota is going to keep that composite bed. One thing I would like to see them changing about the bed, since again I've built my own bed, when I took apart the composite bed from the Toyota Tacoma, there's a tremendous amount of wasted space between the inner bed wall and the outer body part. There's a huge amount of space. I think I did a rough calculation. It was like 22 gallons of volume per bedside. So 44 gallons, you would essentially triple the fuel range of the truck if you can fill all the wasted space in the bedsides with fuel. Pretty crazy. Looking at this image with the speaker again, we'll get the speaker in a second. There you can see the cargo tie-down rails, so that's something that's a carryover part from the 2nd gen Tacoma, from the 3rd gen Tacoma. I hate those cargo tie-down rails. Why are they at the top of the bed? Why are they not on the deck of the bed where they should be? Also, those rails are very slow to adjust. The little mechanism thing is not very sturdy. I have a whole video explaining like these tie-down rails that I have in my truck, and you should definitely go check that out. Furthermore, Nissan uses something very similar to that. They're called airline tracks, what I have in my truck, and it's far better than what Toyota uses. So it's unfortunate to see that they're retaining this little cargo rail, but good to see that they are keeping the composite bed. I think that's awesome. So moving on, we have the iForce, the hybrid system that's in these trucks. I really don't care about the hybrid system, quite frankly. It doesn't really give you a tremendous amount of additional fuel economy. You will probably never make up the cost deficit between the hybrid system and a non-hybrid model. You'll never make that back in fuel, or at least it's a very long period of time. So I guess it's cool. You're probably going to get more power. You will get better fuel economy, but obviously you have a huge initial investment to buy that hybrid system, and it's just more crap to go wrong in the long run. I would be interested in the hybrid system if Toyota does something like they did on the F-150 platform. So on the F-150 platform, it has a hybrid system, and they produce a tremendous amount of power out of the hybrid system, something like 7,000 watts on the highest model. That's a tremendous amount of power. And if you look at the latest Toyota Tundra, that's not available. And the reason why I think that is because in the hybrid system on the Toyota Tundra, they're using an old school, I think it's nickel metal hydride battery chemistry, where the F-150 is using a lithium battery chemistry. Lithium ion batteries are lighter, they last longer, and they can produce a lot more power. So that's probably why you're not seeing as high power outputs on the Toyota Tundra as you are on the F-150 Lightning. Fun fact, but slight tangent here. You look at the Prius, the initial Priuses that came out had, again, old school battery technology. I don't know why Toyota likes that stuff. But if you look at the new Toyota Prius, it went with a lithium ion battery. It lost a tremendous amount of weight. It gained power all around. The new Toyota Prius is a much better Prius. And those lithium batteries last a lot longer. So anyways, if there's old school nickel metal hydride batteries in the hybrid system that's going to come in the 4th gen Tacoma, just stay away from it. Wait for them to go with lithium batteries, or better yet, just wait for them to come out with fully electric Tacomas, because that'll obviously have plenty of onboard power. And then you only have one drivetrain to worry about, not two. Internal combustion engine and electric. You're essentially paying for two drivetrains. It's not a good idea in my opinion. Okay, so we talked about this speaker here. It's cool, I guess, but in my opinion, it's not mounted in a very good place. I don't know, most people overland these days where they're camping out of their vehicles. Like, why would you need your speaker to come away from the truck when you could just open the doors of your truck and play a speaker right there? Seems kind of silly to me. The other thing is the speaker is literally just mounted on the dash of this truck, which is a terrible ideal in my opinion. So essentially everything that's small at least uses lithium ion batteries. So your smartphone, a little headlamp like this one, uses lithium-ion batteries, and wireless speakers also use lithium-ion batteries. The thing about lithium-ion batteries is they're very picky about the temperature they're on. So they don't really like being cold, and most importantly, to what I want to talk about here, is they don't like being hot. And that speaker is literally just smacked right on top of the dash where the sun is beaming down on it. That battery is probably not long for this life. I doubt there's any active cooling going on with that battery. If you want to kill a lithium battery, that's how you do it. You just leave it out in the sun. So maybe get a year or two's worth of life out of that speaker. You know, even from never using it, if you leave it there, it's probably just going to die. At least that's my 2 cents. Anyways, let me know what your most excited feature is about the 4th gen Tacoma. Perhaps it's the looks. That's okay. I don't care about the looks, but whatever. In my opinion, the biggest improvement for the 4th gen Tacoma is going to be that 10-speed transmission. So I know when the Tundra first came out, people were pretty much just bolting 37s on, not re-gearing, and that 10-speed transmission, because it has such a wide selection of gear ratios, it pretty much just doesn't care the 37s are on there. Obviously, it would be better to re-gear, but you don't really need to. And that's a pretty big jump in tire size, going from what, a 31, 33 to a 37, and the 10-speed deals with it beautifully. So yeah, let me know what would be your most preferred mod, like what you want to see added to the 4th gen Tacoma. And make sure and stick around if you want to see more engineering talks like this. Obviously, I like the super nerdy, nitty-gritty stuff. So if you want to see that, make sure and stick around. Also, we're going to do that independent rear suspension video. That's not only to the 4th gen Tacoma, but also like a Ford Bronco is probably going to be improved from that. I really don't hope to see an independent suspension Jeep. I think one vehicle should keep complete solid axles, and I'm glad that the Jeep Wrangler still exists. But yeah, that should be it. Let me know what your most preferred addition to the 4th gen Tacoma. Hey, thanks for watching. And remember, your dreams don't die until you let them.